Wood. I am the performance director at a B2B agency called Hallam. I've been doing SEO for almost 20 years, so I've seen a lot of trends come and go. But for the last 3 or 4 years, the only thing I've been talking about, and the only brief we've been getting from clients, is around AI search. So this is clearly not me. This is an AI-generated image, but it's how I feel and how I'm sure many of you feel with the state of search at the moment, the state of SEO. Because for most brands in the room, I'd say for the last 2 years, 18 months, we've seen traffic declining massively. Regardless if you rank number one, your traffic, your click-through rate will be declining. So we've got a real challenge on our hands. My talk today is going to be covering the trends that are causing that drop in traffic and then what you can do about it. So if we start with a bit of context, I guess for the last 20 years, we've been familiar with this way of searching that's revolved around 10 blue links. Users will have to browse the internet. They'll have to manually discover what they want, click on those websites. Much easier for us as marketers to measure that traffic, to get the clicks, to get the sales. But obviously much more difficult for the users having to spend more time on that. So that kind of search experience is now being made easier for users, more difficult for us as marketers to measure. One of the reasons why this change has happened in the last few years is this rise of the concept of an answer engine. So we've seen platforms like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, Gemini, all cropping up that essentially now take away that manual search experience from the user, giving them the answer in the platform itself. And as a result, we're seeing Google go all in on AI. Google are essentially racing to become OpenAI before OpenAI can become Google. They see this as a massive existential threat to their business model, to their advertising revenue, and they're having to evolve the way they show the search results. So obviously the one that most of you are familiar with, if you haven't been living under a rock for the last 18 months, is the rise of AI overviews. Pretty much any informational search now, the top half of the search page, which is the only half you can really ever see, is the answer. The rest of it is ads. So organic real estate has massively dropped off a cliff. We've also seen them pushing AI mode as a concept, which is basically like ChatGPT for Google. Adoption of AI mode is still around 1% to 2%, so not huge, but expect that to increase over time. And for any of you that hope that this might get any better over the coming years, I would say it's probably only going to get worse. This is Google's head of search, a lady called Liz Reed, who essentially a couple of months ago said that the search results page was just a construct. So I expect them, with all the stuff they're talking about, it's going to be more AI overviews, more pushing AI mode. There'll be some other feature coming out next year, I imagine, that we'll be talking about then. It's going to get more difficult for us. So we need to diversify and adapt our approach. So the challenge that everyone in this room, I would say, faces, regardless of how reliant you are on organic search versus other platforms, is how do you continue to grow your business when most searches no longer result in a click? This is the most common brief that we get into the agency today, regardless of how crap their actual traditional SEO is. It's how the hell do I evolve my approach beyond Google? So I'm going to today talk to you about 3 ways that I think you can do that, starting with the basics and then moving on to the more advanced. So the first point is, how do we optimize for LLM inclusion? And how do we actually show up in these answer engines and in Google's AI overviews? And how is that different from traditional SEO that you're all familiar with? So before I start, I think one of the speakers actually mentioned this earlier on, this concept of query fan out. This is really important to understand how these LLMs work. When you put a question in, one of the processes they follow is called query fan out. They essentially expand that original question and ask a whole variety of related questions to regurgitate a response. Now, where do they get that information is really important, because actually Gemini, for example, uses Google search to get that information. You have ChatGPT using Bing search to get that information. Perplexity have got their own bot. But the key thing here is, if you are not ranking well and performing well in traditional search engines like Bing and Google, you're not going to perform well in LLMs. It doesn't mean that you should rank number 1 and number 2, because there's been various studies that come out that say, actually, just because you're top of the results in Google doesn't mean you're going to be top of the results in ChatGPT, but you have to at least have a good presence in the first couple of pages of those engines to show up in LLMs. So the basic place to start is, don't ignore traditional SEO to start with. Don't jump in and chase the shiny new thing. This is obviously important, and I'm not demeaning the rise of LLMs in any way, because it's obviously a big thing. But actually, it's important to note that while there's a lot of studies that talk about the adoption of ChatGPT and the adoption of Perplexity, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are using those for search alone. They're using them to, for example, rewrite emails, write blog posts, do their own research. So actually, studies that look at the people that use those engines for search show that actually the adoption is less than 1% of people use those as a search engine. The variety of people, the majority of people still use Google and Bing for search. So at least focus there as a starting point. Now, once you've done that, what's the one thing that actually is more important for LLM performance than it is traditional search? Citations. If you've ever undertaken a search on ChatGPT or on Perplexity, you will see very clearly at the top or the right-hand bar the sources of information where they looked at and regurgitated that response. If your brand isn't mentioned on those places, you are not going to be in the response. So it means that digital PR and getting brand mentions and citations across the internet is more important than it's ever been if you want to get coverage in these LLMs. That also holds true in Google's AI overviews. This was a study by a company called SEMrush a couple of months ago, and it showed that the number one factor that correlates with performance in AI overviews, so to get more visibility, was getting more branded web mentions across the internet. So how are you going to do that? PR. There's also a lot of studies if you want to dig into this and be like, right, where do I have to go to start getting my brand mentioned? I'd encourage you to do your own research. But actually have a look at some of the studies that have come out recently, which show the trusted publications used by ChatGPT, by Perplexity, and by Google Gemini. There's lists by vertical, there's lists overall, for example. Forbes comes up quite a lot, The Guardian, for example, WebMD for health queries. But what you should actually be doing is taking the kind of keywords that you traditionally want to perform with on Google and inputting those as search terms into ChatGPT, into Perplexity, and then making a list, a hit list of those sources that show up that they've used. That's essentially your PR target list. You're not going to be able to change the publications and the posts that have already gone out, but the next time they write a best 10 software companies in the UK post, you want to be on that. And finally, in terms of LLM inclusion, we want to also understand that it's not necessarily about getting traffic from these platforms, because for any of you that have used them, the actual sources are very hard to click on. They don't want you to leave the platform. They want to keep you there and keep you searching. What you should be looking at is the number of times your brand is mentioned. And there's a concept called share of model, which is really important to understand, which is essentially how many times is your brand mentioned for relevant queries in these platforms compared to your competition. And there's a number of ways you can do that. There's a number of off-the-shelf platforms that have been built in the last few months that actually can do this. One called Profound, which I've got on the screen here. At Hallam, the agency that I work with, we've also developed our own way of tracking this. So if you want some more information on that, I can send it over afterwards. So summarizing that first kind of tip, optimizing for LLM inclusion, start with the basics. Don't ignore the SEO fundamentals. I've had a few debates with people who just think kind of this LLM optimization thing is just basically SEO. It's not. There's definitely more things that are more important for LLMs than SEO, but start with the basics. If you've got terrible performance in Google and Bing, you're not going to perform well in ChatGPT results. Then understand how these platforms work. As I've said, understand those core data sources. Then start to really target those commonly cited domains. Do your research about which sources are referenced most in your industry and make sure that your PR managers are getting you coverage in those places. I think SEO is now moving beyond basic on-page tweaks that you might be familiar with into kind of more off-site brand management practices. Like reviews are going to be more important. User-generated content is going to be looked at by these engines, and citations as well. So it's getting a lot more difficult and a lot more holistic. And then finally, measuring share of model. The amount of times that you show up in these platforms versus your competitors for relevant keywords. Okay, so we talked about performing on LLMs. Where else should we focus if we want to kind of move beyond Google? So obviously, this will mean going beyond Google into other platforms, diversifying and reducing your reliance on Google alone. Because for many people that we speak to, they think search is just on Google and Bing. But in reality, search expands into multiple different platforms. People do not just carry out searches on Google and Bing. For example, there's various bits of research that looks at kind of Gen Z search behavior, and they look at the fact that social platforms are now being used for different search queries, more so than Google. So we're seeing platforms like TikTok, Reddit, Pinterest, Instagram, different forums being used for search. So we need to make sure that our brands are discoverable in those platforms. It's not just seen as a social media team's job to make sure you're visible there. So at Hallam, we call this total search optimization. We want to move beyond kind of traditional SEO, the basics, making sure that people rank on Google and Bing and ChatGPT, into making sure you're found anywhere that your potential customers could be looking for you online. So what does this look like in practice? Now, obviously, the logos on that screen, the platforms will change. I'm going to talk to you in a minute about research and where to look for that data. But understanding where your audience are actually spending their time online and then pulling the levers that actually matter in terms of improving your visibility on those platforms. So they'll differ depending on the platform. For example, like if you're a brand who your audience spends a lot of time watching YouTube tutorials, making sure you're tweaking the titles and the transcripts of your videos, for example, and the thumbnails is going to be important. We've talked about some optimization on ChatGPT already. TikTok, for example, making sure the hashtags you're using there and the content and the titles you're using. So it's just to note that just like you would optimize a website for performance in Google search and Bing search, you optimize your content on these platforms to make sure you're discoverable as well. The number one place to start, there's actually tools that allow you to do keyword research on these platforms. There's a platform called Keywords Everywhere that you can subscribe to. They've got a paid platform to essentially do keyword research on platforms like YouTube and Pinterest to understand, just like on Google's keyword planner, how competitive is it to show up for these topics? Which keywords and topics are actually trending on these different platforms? So not only can you use that data to optimize your existing content that you've got on those platforms, you can actually use it to inform your content strategy as well. So it should no longer be just ran by the social media team in isolation. If you want to improve your search performance, you need to be working with them to guide that content strategy. And then finally, you've expanded your approach and diversified onto all of those different platforms. It's going to give you that increased reach and that reduced reliance on Google, but it's also going to give you the added benefit of increasing your visibility on Google as well. Because platforms like Reddit are also being shown more and more on Google for informational searches. It's an AI overview mainly, and then it's about 5 subreddits. So by being present and being mentioned in those conversations, you're going to improve your visibility on search as well. Instagram posts are now indexed on Google as well. So if you're getting mentioned and referenced there, it's going to improve your search performance overall. So to summarize the moving beyond Google point, really tackling the SEO fundamentals first, as I've said, then understanding where your audience actually spend their time online. Which platforms are they actually spending their time on? There's a platform I haven't mentioned due to time called SparkToro, which is, for any of you familiar with the old SEO platform Moz, a guy called Rand Fishkin ran that. He's developed a platform that understands, basically plug your website in, it will tell you which platforms are most used by your website audience. So it's a good place to start. Then you can also research topics and keywords. I talked about the Keywords Everywhere tool. Look at what's trending and use that to inform your content strategy. And then optimize for total search visibility. Going back to those levers I said you could pull on the different platforms, optimize your performance on those platforms as well. So finally, I'm going to talk to you about the importance of building a more resilient brand. We've talked about making sure you're getting covered in LLMs. We've talked about getting diversified away from Google and reducing reliance there. Now, how can you build a more resilient brand so you're less worried about those technological changes in the next 5 to 10 years? So regardless of me being an SEO nerd, it's worth pointing out that I think all of us should understand that the most important search engine is still the one in our minds. There's a number of pieces of research that can back this point up. The one that I love to bring up on the screen is this concept of the day one list. This was a piece of research by LinkedIn and a consulting company called Bain that was carried out about 2 to 3 years ago, which found that in B2B, 86% of buyers actually already had a list of potential vendors in mind before they start searching on Google or Bing or wherever the hell they search. And of those people, 93% of them chose from that day one list. So essentially, if you're not already on that list of brands that they could work for and you're relying on search alone, you're very, very unlikely to be the chosen brand. So SEO is important, but it's just such a small part of the pitch you need to be doing. You need to focus elsewhere on building that brand reputation. And on this point, to actually get on that day one list, you need to start building trust with your audience. Because in B2B, this concept of this kind of fear of messing up actually outweighs the fear of missing out. Trust is absolutely essential in B2B to getting on that list. And trust is built through human connections, not through kind of faceless branded content that's put out for your own brand profiles. People want to hear from humans. People trust humans. And this is getting more and more important because of the rise of AI, because of the rise of AI-generated content. They want a genuine face and a person to that piece of content. We're also seeing robots and search engines trust humans, probably a bit too much. This is from a couple of years ago when Google were talking about basically surfacing Reddit threads that told people to eat 10 rocks a day because it was good for them. But they are now surfacing user-generated content. They're still surfacing Reddit content. They're indexing Instagram posts. So making sure that you've got individuals posting that content is going to improve your search presence. This has all become more important, like I said, because of AI. AI can now generate content faster and cheaper than ever before. There's a proliferation of this AI-generated crap all over the internet that doesn't take much time from an expert to actually write. So not only do we as humans want to see actual human perspectives surface, search engines are trying to kind of filter out what is actually relevant. What should I actually show at the top of my results? It's going to be human-edited content. And this isn't a new thing. This has been happening for a number of years. For the last 5 years, Google have been talking about this EEAT principle, expertise, experience, authority, and trust. It's essentially putting a face and a name to the content that you write as an organization, whether that's a blog post, a video, social media content. It's tying back all those entities, all those experts related to your organization back to your brand. And if any of you are as old as me and have been working in SEO as long as me, this actually started back in 2012 with a concept called Google authorship. You used to be able to tie your Google Plus profile to your website and have your face show in the search results. This was the start of what's been coming for a number of years. They're trying to weed out crap and put genuine experts at the top of the results for B2B queries. So not only is it going to be important for search visibility, it's important just generally for reach. If you want to expand your reach and kind of reduce your reliance on search, you need to get your experts out there. So an example here, not necessarily B2B, from a publisher called The Athletic. The Athletic started 3 or 4 years ago, essentially by buying or paying for the leading journalists in the UK, sports journalists, to go and write for them. They started from nothing, but the way they built the brand was through buying in the best experts who already had that profile, they already had that reach, and they brought them in. And this is the example of the guy I showed there. He's obviously quite a big on Twitter as a football journalist, but his following massively outweighs the actual brand itself. And if you times that by, let's say, 100, 200 journalists, and put this in the perspective of our business context today as well, you imagine all your experts have got much greater reach on platforms like LinkedIn than your brand itself. They've got a huge network to tap into. So use their reach and piggyback on that reach to make you less reliant on Google search alone. And again, just to back that point up, there's a bit of research from LinkedIn that showed that your employees, the combined following of your employees is actually 12 times greater than the company page itself. So if you're still posting content through the brand page and not using your staff to expand that reach, you're missing out on a massive trick here when it comes to diversification. And that's why, if any of you have also worked in paid media, what we're seeing at Hallam is actually thought leader ads. When we're running thought leader ads for our clients, they perform much better in terms of engagement than the actual branded ads themselves. So putting more and more spend into thought leadership ads, promoting the people that work at the brand rather than promoting the brand itself. And that's why you're seeing this kind of proliferation in B2B of kind of the C-suite and product experts just doing kind of less polished, authentic content because they know it resonates with the audience. They know they're going to build that engagement better than the brand itself. We know it's going to expand that reach. So, recap on the human expertise point, the importance of getting on the day one list. And there's many things I could talk about around getting on the day one list, around reach and spending on advertising. But what I want to focus on here is how you can showcase genuine human expertise and piggyback on the reach of your employees to get on that list. And remember the final point as well, don't worry about having such polished content. I think we work with a lot of brands who are kind of scared just to put out that kind of short form content that's just getting their experts on the screen. Don't worry about that. I think the authenticity is more important than the polished content these days. So just a quick recap, because I think we've run out of time almost. 3 things. Invest more in kind of off-site SEO. Obviously, the SEO fundamentals are really important, but I think SEO is now turning more into kind of a PR and brand reputation piece, especially when it comes to being visible in LLMs. It's much more difficult to optimize titles, descriptions, and content on a page. You need to be building PR coverage and citations across the internet. The things we would have done 5 years ago will not get you the same results. Show up everywhere, which is easy said than done, but understand where your audience is spending their time and then make sure you are optimizing that content alongside your social team to improve your visibility there as well. And then finally, tap into your experts, tap into the product experts across your business, because people will want to see them to build trust that your products will do what you say they can do and tie them back to your branded content. Finally, quick plug. I don't know if anyone's walked past our stand today. We also have a B2B community called Better B2B. It's completely free to join. We do a number of events across the UK. We've partnered with LinkedIn, Google, Meta, Microsoft. So if you're interested in kind of being part of that, essentially the QR code on the screen will let you sign up. Once you sign up, you'll be able to kind of just get free invites to these events, essentially. So there's no need to pay, get loads of events. There's an online community. You can ask questions and share challenges. So if you are keen on that, then please join. That's everything I've got time for. So thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.